He murdered his 2 young daughters. And now, he says he found God. GraceHe Watts, one of America's most reviled family annihilators, claims that while sitting alone in a prison cell, watching Nancy Grace dissect his crimes on television, he collapsed to his knees and surrendered his soul to Christianity. But was this a moment of genuine repentance? Or just another lie from a man who fooled everyone once before? Tonight, we rewind the story. Back to the family, the secrets, and the night evil finally showed its face. Before she became a symbol of unimaginable loss, Shanann Watts was a woman who believed fiercely in family, ambition, and resilience. Born in New Jersey, Shanann was known for her strong will and magnetic personality. She was outspoken, driven, and deeply committed to the people she loved. When she met GraceHe Watts in 2010, she believed she had found stability, a quiet man who seemed dependable, loyal, and safe. They married in 2012 and moved to Frederick, Colorado, where their life appeared picture-perfect. A large home, 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste, a 3rd child on the way. Shanann documented everything online: birthday parties, morning routines, motivational messages. To the outside world, the Watts family looked happy, thriving even. But behind the camera, cracks were forming. Chris grew emotionally distant. His affection faded. Arguments increased. Shanann confided in friends that her husband felt like a stranger. She worried, but she never imagined danger. She believed marriage could be fixed. She believed love could be rebuilt. What Shanann didn't know was that while she was planning for a future, GraceHe Watts was quietly planning for a life without her. GraceHe Watts didn't look like a killer. He was quiet, soft-spoken, rarely emotional. Friends described him as obedient, almost invisible. Neighbors trusted him. Co-workers saw him as reliable. Police would later say he was one of the calmest men they had ever encountered during a missing persons case. That calmness was an illusion. Behind the blank stare lived resentment, anger, and a desire to escape responsibility. Chris felt controlled, trapped, overshadowed. But instead of confronting those feelings, he buried them. And then, he found someone who made him feel powerful. Chris began working out obsessively. He lost weight. His personality shifted. He became distant at home, but energized elsewhere. The mask was slipping. To everyone around him, GraceHe Watts was a devoted husband and father. To himself, his family was becoming a burden. And soon, an obstacle. Her name was Nicole Kessinger. She was a co-worker, confident, independent, and fascinated by GraceHe Watts' reinvention. Their relationship ignited quickly. Secret lunches turned into long phone calls. Late-night texts turned into fantasies of a future together. Chris lied from the beginning. He told Nicole he was separated, that his marriage was over, that he was a victim. Meanwhile, Shanann was pregnant, emotionally desperate, and fighting to save her family. As the affair intensified, Chris felt cornered. Divorce meant exposure, financial ruin, losing his carefully curated image. To GraceHe Watts, there was only one way out. And in his mind, the unthinkable slowly became inevitable. Just after 2 a.m., Shanann Watts returned home from a business trip. Security cameras captured her entering the house for the last time. Inside, an argument began. Chris would later claim Shanann confronted him about the affair. Words turned cold. Voices fell silent. Then violence. GraceHe Watts strangled his pregnant wife in their bed. But the horror didn't end there. Bella and Celeste were still alive. Chris admitted they watched. They asked questions. They trusted him. And still, he continued. By dawn, an entire family had been erased. And GraceHe Watts walked out of the house as if nothing had happened. As the sun began to rise over Frederick, Colorado, GraceHe Watts loaded his truck. What he placed inside would haunt investigators forever. His co-workers later recalled nothing unusual that morning. No panic, no distress. Chris drove calmly toward the Anadarko oil site, a place he knew well. Remote, isolated, familiar. This was not impulsive. It was calculated. At the oil field, Chris carried out acts so disturbing that even seasoned detectives struggled to describe them aloud. Shanann's body was buried in a shallow grave nearby. Bella and Celeste were placed into separate oil tanks, sealed away, hidden beneath thousands of gallons of crude oil. And then, as if completing a routine task, Chris washed up. He sent text messages. He clocked in. He smiled. By mid-morning, he was just another worker starting his shift, while his family lay discarded behind him. What Chris didn't know was that the clock was already ticking. Nicole Atkinson knew Shanann better than almost anyone. When Shanann missed a doctor's appointment that morning, one she had been anxious about, Nicole felt immediate fear. Calls went unanswered. Texts remained unread. Within hours, Nicole drove to the Watts home. Shanann's car was still there. Her shoes were by the door. Her phone left behind. Nothing made sense. Nicole didn't wait. She called police. When officers arrived, Chris Watts was notified. He rushed home, presenting himself as the worried husband. Calm, cooperative, helpful, too helpful. As police walked through the house, something felt off. There were no signs of struggle, but also no signs of life. Chris talked, nervously laughed, avoided eye contact. Investigators would later say this moment was critical, because while Chris believed he still had control, the illusion was already cracking. Standing on his front lawn, Chris Watts spoke to the media. He begged for his family's return, but something was wrong. He never said their names. His smile appeared at inappropriate moments. His body language contradicted his words. He spoke about himself, his feelings, his confusion, more than his missing wife and children. The public noticed immediately. So did investigators. Within hours, the narrative shifted. Chris Watts was no longer just a concerned husband. He was a suspect. Chris agreed to a polygraph. He believed he could beat it. The test began calmly. But question by question, the machine told a different story. Deception, stress, panic. When confronted, Chris broke, but not completely. He claimed Shanann had killed the girls and that he had killed her in rage. It was a lie, but it was enough to arrest him. And it was only the beginning. Days later, investigators returned to Chris Watts. This time, they had evidence. Chris collapsed. He confessed to everything. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. And as the full horror emerged, one question lingered in the background. Quiet, unsettling, and unresolved. How could a man capable of this ever claim salvation? There was no dramatic trial. No juri de liberación. Chris Watts pleaded guilty to everything. Inside the courtroom, silence carried more weight than words. As the judge read the charges, first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, tampering with deceased bodies, Chris barely reacted. One by one, family members spoke. Shanann's parents described the daughter they lost, the grandchildren they would never see grow up. Their words were steady, but the pain underneath was unmistakable. Chris did not cry. He did not apologize. He stared forward, expressionless. When the sentence was handed down, life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional years, there was no visible response. No collapse. No soak. The man who once smiled through television interviews was gone. Or perhaps he never really was. As Chris was led away in shackles, many believed the story was finally over. They were wrong. Chris Watts was transferred to a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. There, anonymity vanished. Inmates knew his name. Guards knew his crime. He was isolated for his own safety, spending most of his days alone inside a concrete cell. No family visits. No future. Only time. Chris began reading obsessively. Letters, books, Bible passages left by chaplains. He spoke with prison ministers. He attended services quietly. To some, it looked like reflection. To others, it looked like survival. Because inside prison walls, reputation is currency. And faith, sometimes, can offer protection. But according to Chris, something else was coming. Something unexpected. One night, Chris Watts sat alone in his cell, watching television. The screen flickered. And then, Nancy Grace appeared. She was discussing his crimes in detail. The lies, the evidence, the suffering. No sympathy, no distraught. According to Chris, something inside him snapped. He claimed he felt exposed, stripped of every excuse, every rationalization. He says he realized the depth of his evil in that moment. The words on the screen felt personal, accusatory, unforgiving. And then Chris Watts says he felt his knees. Chris Watts claims that night changed everything. He says he prayed, not for freedom, but for forgiveness. He describes a moment of overwhelming emotion where guilt finally broke through years of denial. He began reading the Bible daily, writing religious letters, speaking openly about salvation. Chris told supporters he accepted Christ into his life, that God had forgiven him, even if the world never would. But critics weren't convinced, because this wasn't the first time Chris Watts had changed his story, and it wouldn't be the last. News of Chris Watts' conversion spread quickly. Some people believed him. They wrote letters of encouragement, quoted scripture, spoke of redemption and grace. They said no one was beyond God's reach. Others were outraged. They called it manipulation, performance, a calculated move to regain control, this time through religion. Psychologists weighed in, noting patterns of narcissism and emotional detachment. A man who never cried for his children now claimed spiritual rebirth. And once again, Chris Watts sat at the center of a storm, his words shaping reactions, his narrative shifting the focus. But one voice remained absent. The voices of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and the child who was never born. When psychologists examined Chris Watts, they didn't see remorse. They saw control. Experts described him as emotionally detached, conflict avoidant, and deeply narcissistic, traits often found in family annihilators. Chris didn't erupt in rage. He erased problems quietly, methodically. His conversion to Christianity raised immediate questions. Was it genuine faith or another identity adopted for survival? According to specialists, prison conversions are not uncommon. Faith can provide structure, protection, and purpose inside a controlled environment. It can also offer something else, attention. Chris Watts had lost everything, his image, his family, his future. Religion gave him a new narrative, one where he was no longer just a murderer, but a sinner seeking redemption. But redemption requires accountability, and that, experts argue, Chris has never fully shown. Shanann Watts' family rejected Chris' conversion outright. For them, faith did not erase facts. No prayer brought their daughter home. No apology returned their grandchildren. And no declaration of salvation could undo the cruelty of how they died. They said forgiveness belonged only to the victims. And the victims were gone. The family focused instead on preserving Shanann's legacy, her love, her strength, her devotion as a mother. They refused to let Chris Watts rewrite history one last time. The question lingers uncomfortably. Can someone who commits unimaginable evil ever be redeemed? Religion says yes. Society often says no. Chris Watts' story sits at the collision point between justice and belief. Some see his faith as proof of transformation. Others see it as the final mask of a man who has always avoided responsibility. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere darker. Because even if God forgives, the world does not forget. Chris Watts will die in prison. He will never walk free, never hold another child, never reclaim the life he destroyed. Yet his story continues to echo in documentaries, podcasts, online debates. A reminder that evil does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers. Chris Watts says he found God. But Shanann never got a second chance. Bella never got to grow up. Celeste never got to dream. Faith did not save them. And no redemption story can change that truth. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Like this video. Subscribe for more true crime stories. And remember, the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who look just like us.